Curtis Jackson looked dead into a camera and announced the music was finished. Done. Retired. And before the interview clip could even cool off, Rick Ross was standing on a stage in front of thousands of people, setting the whole statement on fire. What Rick Ross said next did not sound like a joke. What Rick Ross said next sounded like a man reading a eulogy for a career that was still breathing. Stay with this story, because buried inside this latest round of the longest Cold War in hip-hop is a detail almost nobody caught. A detail about money. A detail about a sneaker. A detail about a piece of equity Rick Ross claims to own inside a platform 50 Cent performed on for free. By the end of this breakdown, the question is not who won the argument. The question is whether the argument is the product. Whether two of the most calculated businessmen rap has ever produced stopped beefing years ago and quietly started running the most profitable fake war in the culture. Keep watching, because the receipts in this one run deep. Start at the flashpoint. 50 Cent sat for an interview and addressed the question that follows 50 Cent into every room now. Where is the album? Where is the music? And 50 Cent gave an answer that sounded mature, measured, almost philosophical. 50 Cent said hip-hop culture is connected to youth culture. 50 Cent said nobody is supposed to be the hottest at 60. 50 Cent said the love for music is still there, that the studio still gets visits, that little pieces and tabs still get recorded so the fans can hear that the pen never died. But a full album? A full campaign? 50 Cent said the door should stay open for the younger generation. 50 Cent said the move is not about fear. 50 Cent framed the whole decision as grace. A legend stepping aside so the kids can eat. Beautiful answer. Clean answer. The kind of answer a media mogul gives on a press run for a television empire. There was only one problem. Rick Ross heard every word, and Rick Ross was not buying a single syllable. Within hours, the Teflon Don grabbed a microphone and a phone camera and went to work. Rick Ross reminded everybody that Bun B just hit the stage, and the South would never let Bun B stop rapping. Rick Ross said if Pimp C was still alive, the culture would never let Pimp C stop rapping either. Legends in the South get albums at 85 if the streets still love the legend. That was the shot. Not a diss about sales. Not a diss about charts. A diss about heart. Rick Ross was standing in front of the world saying 50 Cent quit because 50 Cent lost the one thing money cannot buy back. The hunger. The love. The streets. And then Rick Ross did what Rick Ross always does. Rick Ross made the whole thing personal, and Rick Ross made the whole thing about a pair of sneakers. Because while 50 Cent was out here talking about legacy and youth culture, 50 Cent was also doing something else. 50 Cent re-released the G-Unit Reebok sneakers. The same silhouette from the early 2000s. The same shoe that once sat in every barbershop window in America. And according to 50 Cent, the relaunch sold out in under 3 hours. Sold out. Gone. A legend reminding the market that the brand never left. Now pause right there, because this is where the story splits in two directions. On one side, fans flooded social media calling 50 Cent a marketing genius. Some voices online swore the sneakers sold out in seconds, not minutes. Fans bragged about missing pairs, promised to grab restocks, called the drop classic New York energy. One fan said the proof that New York still rides for 50 Cent is sitting in the sellout numbers. No bots needed. No tricks needed. Just a name that still moves product 20 years later. But on the other side stood Rick Ross, and Rick Ross came with arithmetic. Rick Ross claimed the top 3 sneaker people in the game personally confirmed that none of them received G-Unit pairs. Rick Ross said if the shoe really sold out in 3 hours, then Reebok must have only put 200 pairs up for sale. Rick Ross accused 50 Cent of capping, called the whole sellout a marketing mirage, and then reached back 25 years into the files. Rick Ross brought up the bankruptcy. Rick Ross said 50 Cent filed a $100 million bankruptcy the last time the G-Unit sneaker money was supposed to be flowing, and Rick Ross said 50 Cent never bounced back from that filing. Rick Ross even dragged Jay-Z into the mud, saying Jay-Z ran the same play on 50 Cent 25 years ago, and 50 Cent is still repeating the same cycle. Read that again slowly. Rick Ross did not just call the sneaker drop fake. Rick Ross called the entire second act of 50 Cent's business career a rerun. A loop. A man doing the same dance moves to a song that stopped charting decades ago. And Rick Ross was not finished. Not even close. Rick Ross told 50 Cent straight to the camera, "Stop lying to the people about the shoes." Rick Ross said nobody is reselling the sneakers. Nobody is buying the sneakers. And the only people claiming a sellout are the people on the payroll. Rick Ross laughed at the outfit 50 Cent wore during a Verzuz appearance, said 50 Cent needs a stylist, and toasted every real hustler watching while sipping the signature Bel Air. Rick Ross even predicted the G-Unit sneakers would end up in Costco next to the bulk paper towels. Then came the moment that turned a routine troll session into something stranger. In the middle of the rant, Rick Ross let a detail slip that most of the internet scrolled right past. Rick Ross told a story about being asked whether the Verzuz appearance got watched. And Rick Ross smiled and said the quiet part out loud. Rick Ross claimed to own equity in Verzuz. Equity. Ownership. A piece of the very platform 50 Cent performed on. Rick Ross looked into the camera and thanked 50 Cent for the employment. Thanked 50 Cent for the free pop-out. Said next time there better be a bottle of Bel Air waiting backstage. Sit with that for a second. If the claim is real, then one of the most watched moments of 50 Cent's recent career put money directly into Rick Ross's pocket. The man 50 Cent has spent 17 years calling Officer Ricky allegedly collected a check off 50 Cent's own performance. And instead of hiding that fact, Rick Ross broadcast the claim with a grin, because in this war, humiliation is currency, and Rick Ross just printed a fresh stack. Now flip the lens. Because 50 Cent has never once sat in a chair and taken punches without loading up a clip of return fire. And the history here matters, because the history explains why this round feels different from every round before it. Go back to the late 2000s. This feud did not start over sneakers or streaming numbers. This feud started over respect, over a look at an awards show, over two empires colliding at the exact moment both empires were at full power. 50 Cent responded the way 50 Cent has always responded. Total warfare. 50 Cent dug into Rick Ross's past as a correctional officer and welded the nickname Officer Ricky onto Rick Ross permanently. 50 Cent mocked the album sales when Triple C's move numbers 50 Cent could recite from memory. 50 Cent once asked an interviewer what Rick Ross's last album sold and answered the question before the interviewer could blink. 34,000 copies, 50 Cent said, and then suggested the label bought half of those out of pure panic. And when the conversation turned to money, 50 Cent never flinched. 50 Cent told interviewers that destroying Rick Ross was not cruelty, it was portfolio management. A portfolio of dead bodies, 50 Cent called the collection of careers ended along the way. A warning sign to every artist who thought about competing before being ready. That is the machine Rick Ross has been swinging at for 17 years. Not a rapper. A machine that learned early that attention converts to money and humiliation converts to attention. But here is where the ground shifted under both men, and here is the part of the story that separates this chapter from every chapter before it. Because while Rick Ross was firing off sneaker jokes and bankruptcy receipts, 50 Cent was sitting on a different kind of ammunition. Silence. Strategic silence. 50 Cent looked at the modern album economy, looked at the streaming era, looked at the first week scoreboard that social media turns into a public execution every single Friday, and 50 Cent made a calculation. Why hand the internet a number to mock? Why give Rick Ross a first week figure to turn into a meme? 50 Cent watched what happened when Rick Ross dropped Set in Stone, and the projections came back in the low 20s. 50 Cent watched the timeline ignite. And 50 Cent was the one holding the lighter. Remember, when the Set in Stone projections leaked, 50 Cent did not offer sympathy. 50 Cent did not offer context about the streaming landscape. 50 Cent got online and joked that Rick Ross would have to promote car shows and sell chicken wings to survive. That is the scoreboard Rick Ross is standing on when Rick Ross questions why 50 Cent refuses to drop another album. Rick Ross knows exactly what happens when a legacy artist posts a weak number in 2026. Rick Ross lived that exact humiliation cycle. So when Rick Ross stands on a stage and demands to know why 50 Cent is scared of the booth, understand the subtext. Rick Ross is not asking a question. Rick Ross is setting a trap. If 50 Cent never drops, Rick Ross gets to call 50 Cent a coward forever. If 50 Cent does drop and the number comes back soft, Rick Ross gets to do to 50 Cent exactly what 50 Cent did to Rick Ross. There is no losing move for Rick Ross in this argument. There is only upside. And men who built $100 million brands do not stumble into arguments with only upside. Men like that choose those arguments. Now watch what Rick Ross did next, because this is the chess move hiding inside the clowning. Rick Ross pivoted from the sneaker rant into a completely different sermon, and the sermon was about bots. Rick Ross started talking about first week numbers, 22,000 one week, 20,000 the next, steady numbers, honest numbers. Rick Ross said the drastic fall-offs the culture sees from other artists are what inflated numbers look like. Rick Ross declared that the new flex is no bots. Keep it genuine. Keep it pure. Let the music fight the battles. And then Rick Ross aimed the whole philosophy directly at 50 Cent's empire. Rick Ross asked the question that cut deeper than any sneaker joke. If an artist genuinely moves a gazillion streams in week one, why can that same artist not sell anything outside the music? Why does the alcohol not sell? Why do the clothes not move? Why does every venture outside the songs fall flat if the fanbase is real? That question is not random. That question is a missile aimed at the foundation of 50 Cent's entire second career. Because 50 Cent's whole legend after the music is built on one story. The story of the man who turned a rap career into a vitamin water fortune, a bankruptcy into a television dynasty, a beef into a brand. If Rick Ross can convince the culture that 50 Cent's numbers were never real, that the streams were inflated and the sellouts were staged, then the mogul mythology cracks. And once the mythology cracks, the whole empire starts looking like the sneakers Rick Ross swears are sitting in a warehouse. Overhyped. Underbought. Propped up by narrative instead of demand. But do not get it twisted. Rick Ross is not standing on some untouched moral high ground here, and honesty requires saying so. Rick Ross has a fortune built on image too. The mansions, the car shows, the Wingstop franchises, the Bel Air partnership, the Promised Land estate. Rick Ross sells a fantasy of bosshood the same way 50 Cent sells a fantasy of invincibility. Both men understand something about this culture that most artists never learn. Perception compounds faster than money. The image of winning attracts more winning. The image of losing attracts vultures. That is why neither of these men can ever stop this war. The war is the marketing. The war keeps both names in mouths that would otherwise move on to younger voices. And here is the angle nobody wants to say out loud, so let it be said right here. Look at the timing. Every single time one of these men has something to sell, the other one appears like clockwork. 50 Cent re-releases sneakers, and suddenly Rick Ross is on stage talking about retirement. Rick Ross drops an album, and suddenly 50 Cent is online with sales projections and chicken wing jokes. Verzuz needed a moment, and both men delivered one. The culture gets a show. The timelines get a fire. And both bank accounts get a deposit. At a certain point, a reasonable person has to ask whether the longest beef in hip-hop stopped being a beef a long time ago and quietly became the most reliable joint business venture either man ever launched. Just two rivals who figured out that fighting each other pays better than almost anything else either of them could do alone. Now, is that provable? No. There is no leaked email, no filing, no document showing these two men splitting the proceeds of the drama. But watch the behavior. Watch how neither man ever lands a truly fatal blow. 50 Cent had the officer Ricky ammunition for years, and Rick Ross still toured, still dropped albums, still built the empire. Rick Ross has the bankruptcy receipts and the sneaker skepticism, and 50 Cent still sells out shows and greenlights television seasons. Two men with genuinely destructive information, and yet somehow both careers survive every exchange. That is either the luckiest feud in history or the most disciplined one. And pay attention to who else got pulled into the gravity of this fight, because the supporting cast tells its own story. Bun B did not ask to be the exhibit in this trial, yet Bun B's stage presence became the evidence. Pimp C has been gone for years, yet Pimp C's name still enters the conversation as the standard for how a culture is supposed to treat its elders. Jay-Z caught a stray in a rant about sneakers. Lloyd Banks caught a shout-out in the middle of a troll session, with Rick Ross casually ranking G-Unit sneaker silhouettes. Eminem's name surfaced because 50 Cent teased new music with Eminem, and Rick Ross swatted the tease away like a fly at a cookout. Even the Verzuz platform became a character in the story the moment the equity claim hit the air. This is what 17 years of warfare builds. Not a feud between two men. A whole shared universe, with its own mythology, its own recurring characters, its own canon of receipts and betrayals and running jokes that the audience can recite by heart. New fans inherit the lore the day the first clip lands on the timeline. That is the asset. That is the thing no marketing budget can manufacture. And that is why, no matter how loud the insults get, neither of these men will ever truly close the door on the other, because the day the war officially ends is the day both men lose the most dependable audience-generating machine either of them ever built. Now step back and look at the machinery underneath the insults, because the sneaker fight is not really about sneakers, and the retirement fight is not really about retirement. Both fights are about the same invisible asset every legacy artist is quietly desperate to protect. Catalog heat. Attention equity. The ability to make a headline without releasing a single song. Watch how efficiently both men operate. 50 Cent announces nothing, drops nothing, risks nothing, and still ends up the subject of 1,000 think pieces because Rick Ross stood on a stage and said the name Curtis Jackson. Rick Ross spends $0 on promotion, records a 90-second rant from a car or a stage, and the clip does more impressions than most label campaigns do with six-figure budgets. This is the new economy of the veteran rapper. The album is optional. The moment is mandatory. And both of these men are grandmasters at manufacturing moments. Notice something else. The weapons have changed. 10 years ago, this war ran through diss records and radio freestyles. Now the war runs through business receipts, sneaker sellout claims, bankruptcy filings from decades ago, publishing ownership, masters, Verzuz equity, franchise counts. The news scoreboard is not the Billboard chart, it is the balance sheet, and both men know the audience changed with it. The fans watching this fight are not just hip-hop fans anymore. The fans are aspiring moguls, resellers, day traders, content entrepreneurs. When Rick Ross says the new flex is no bots, Rick Ross is not talking to rap fans. Rick Ross is talking to a generation that audits celebrities the way accountants audit corporations. And when 50 Cent answers every question about music with an answer about television and youth culture, 50 Cent is talking to that same audience. Two products, same demographic, one shared battlefield. And the detail about the unreleased music deserves a second look, because it is the most revealing confession in the entire exchange. When asked whether there are albums sitting in a vault somewhere, 50 Cent admitted there is music in the desk. Music nobody gets to hear. Think about what that means strategically. The vault is the ultimate hedge. As long as the music stays unreleased, the music can never flop, can never be measured, can never be turned into a meme by Rick Ross or anybody else. The unreleased album is worth more to 50 Cent than any released album ever could be, because the unreleased album is pure potential. Infinite numbers. Infinite classics. A Schrödinger masterpiece that stays legendary precisely because nobody can press play on it. Rick Ross understands this, which is exactly why Rick Ross keeps demanding the music come out. Rick Ross does not want to hear the album. Rick Ross wants to see the number. There is one more layer to the bankruptcy shot, and it is the layer that stings the most. When Rick Ross said 50 Cent filed the filing and never bounced back, the claim was factually sloppy, because the television empire, the touring revenue, and the spirits deals all exist after that filing. But the sloppiness does not matter, because the shot was never aimed at the facts. The shot was aimed at the story. 50 Cent spent years building the narrative of the greatest comeback businessman in rap history. Rick Ross is simply refusing to co-sign the narrative, and in this war, withholding the co-sign is the entire weapon. Neither man needs to destroy the other. Each man only needs to keep the other man's legend from being unanimous. As long as the debate exists, both men eat. Meanwhile, the fans pick sides the way fans always do, and the fan response revealed something neither artist can control. The streets, meaning the actual listeners, and not the blogs, answered 50 Cent's retirement talk with something close to disrespect. Voices across social media said what Rick Ross was saying, just rougher. Legends do not get to retire when the culture still wants the music. Bun B still hits stages. The South never benched its kings. And the crowd reminded everyone that the real reason artists vanish is rarely nobility. Artists vanish when the numbers stop forgiving them. 50 Cent said the choice was about youth culture and staying out of the way. The streets heard something else. The streets heard a man doing math on a scoreboard the man no longer trusts himself to win on. And that might be the most brutal read of all. Because 50 Cent built a career on fearlessness. 50 Cent got shot 9 times and turned the scars into a marketing campaign. 50 Cent beefed with everybody, outworked everybody, outsold everybody in the prime years. Get Rich or Die Tryin' was not just an album title, it was a business plan. So for that same man to now stand in front of the world and explain that stepping aside is the wise move, the graceful move, the mogul move, the culture hears a translation nobody wants to say to a legend's face. The translation sounds like fear of a number. Fear of a first week. Fear of watching Rick Ross or anybody else stand over a SoundCloud-era sales figure and laugh the way 50 Cent once laughed at 34,000 copies. Rick Ross said it flat. Rick Ross said being disappointed in 50 Cent. Rick Ross said 50 Cent's mother is turning over. That is not business talk. That is family talk. That is a rival reaching past the brand and grabbing for the man's identity. And whether the shot lands fair or foul, the shot reveals what this war has always really been about. Not sneakers. Not sales. Not publishing or masters or Verzuz equity. Identity. 2 men who came from nothing, who built versions of themselves the world had to respect, who cannot allow the other man's version to stand unchallenged, because if the other man's story is the true one, then somebody's whole life was the lesser performance. Now zoom out one more time, because the bigger question hanging over all of this belongs to the entire culture. When should a rapper stop? Is there an age where the mic should get hung up, or does the hunger decide? 50 Cent says the culture belongs to the young, and stepping back is power. Rick Ross says the streets decide when a legend is finished, and the streets have not decided anything. Both positions have evidence. 50 Cent watched what a weak first week did to the Rick Ross narrative, and chose the television empire instead. Rick Ross watched Bun B get celebrated on stage at an age 50 Cent calls too old, and chose to keep rapping until 85 if the love holds. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere the fanbases refuse to visit. Both men are right, and both men are performing. 50 Cent genuinely does not need another album. The television slate, the spirits deals, the touring checks, the development projects. The machine prints money without a single new verse. And Rick Ross genuinely does not need to keep rapping either. The franchises, the estate, the partnerships, the brand. But Rick Ross keeps recording because recording is the root of the whole tree. Every Bel Air toast, every boss sermon, every car show works because the music made the character first. Rick Ross knows that cutting the root kills the branches. 50 Cent knows that too, which is why 50 Cent still records little pieces and tabs in private, still teases the vault, still keeps the pen technically alive, while refusing to step onto the public scoreboard. Both men are protecting the same thing from opposite directions. The myth. 50 Cent protects the myth by never risking a number. Rick Ross protects the myth by never stopping the hustle. Two strategies. One religion. The religion of never looking broke, never looking beaten, never looking done. And that is why this latest exchange hit different from the hundreds before it. This was not about a diss track. This was two aging kings arguing in public about the terms of their own exits, while both quietly refused to exit anything. 50 Cent retired from albums the way a boxer retires from title fights, while still selling out arenas for exhibitions. Rick Ross clowned the retirement, while sitting on the same kind of diversified empire that makes the rapping optional. The argument was theater. The theater was business. The business is still booming. So where does the war go from here? Nowhere. Everywhere. The same place the war has lived for 17 years. In the space between two brands that discovered long ago that the other man is the most valuable marketing asset either of them will ever own. 50 Cent will keep not dropping the album, and every interview about not dropping it will trend. Rick Ross will keep calling 50 Cent a liar, a quitter, a bankruptcy rerunner, and every rant will chart higher than most artists' singles. The sneakers will sell or they will not, and both men will claim victory either way. The bots debate will rage. The equity claim will linger. The next flashpoint is already loaded, because with these two, the next flashpoint is always already loaded. Now the floor is yours. Is 50 Cent wise for stepping off the album scoreboard, or is Rick Ross right that a real one never stops when the streets still love him? And the bigger one, after 17 years, is this still a beef, or are two of the sharpest businessmen in the culture just running the longest unspoken partnership in rap history? Drop the verdict in the comments, because this debate splits every room it enters. If this breakdown earned a spot on the screen, hit the like button, subscribe, tap the bell, so the next chapter of this war lands directly in the feed, and share this with somebody who still argues about Officer Ricky and Curtis Jackson like the beef started yesterday. It did not start yesterday. And if the pattern holds, it never ends.